I'm against the drug testing and against the banning of people for lives and wrecking their careers for a number of reasons. First of all, because there's no evidence the drugs work. So it seems a damn silly game in any case. Secondly, because what athletes already do is no different from taking drugs. And I suppose that is a part of the fact that I'm a clinical scientist and do try to do things that seem to be justifiable logically, and it's totally illogical. But beyond that, I don't like it because this is interfering unnecessarily in other people's lives.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed very much as a doctor practicing over the last few years has been a general increase in the drive to regulate people's behaviour through the medium of health. And doctors have taken an increasing role in relation to policing of people's lifestyle, exercise and diet and smoking and drinking, all those sorts of activities. And that has become a sphere of the moral regulation of society, which doctors have taken an increasing role in, I think in recognition of the fact that traditional ways of regulating people's behaviour have become less effective. Now, one of the things that I think we're seeing in more recent times is that sport has come to take a bigger role in this area. And so there's a desire to use sporting figures as role models for young people in relation not only to sporting activity, but also in relation to wider areas of people's lives. It's just a way of using sport as a means of moral regulation.
Well, part of the problem about assuming drugs have an effect in promoting performance is these drugs, all of them, have effects in the laboratory. If you take steroids, it has an effect on muscle. If you take growth hormone, it has an effect on many parts of the body. All the drugs that have been used have certain effects, if you like, micro effects, but very profound, very real effects. It's been assumed from that you can extrapolate into whole body effects, and that's a fatal mistake. It's commonplace for a drug to be developed in the lab and it has, say, an effect on blood pressure, and people think, oh, that will control blood pressure. No such thing. So the idea that because an androgen steroid can bulk up a muscle, it'll make you first in the race is nonsense. You cannot extrapolate, and that's well known in pharmacology. You mustn't assume because they have some effect, they will have a particular end effect. And that's a part of the argument used dishonestly by the people who promote drug testing. They say, oh, these are powerful drugs, therefore you mustn't use them. They are powerful drugs, but not at the end point of winning a race. And until you've got that, you don't know. And that is the other point too, as to why none of these drugs are shown to be effective. To show a drug is effective, you have to have the specific endpoint. That means the endpoint of a 100-meter race, a high jump, golf, tennis, synchronized swimming. They will all have different attributes. And the idea that one drug or one combination will work in all these is absolute nonsense. It never does. To show an effect, and this is the key point, you need a double-blind, randomized, controlled study of that endpoint, the winning, the height, whatever. Until you have that individual measure, the drug is not shown effective. No physician will use or be allowed to use the drug without that evidence. None of the drugs presumed to work in sport have been tested that way. Taking drugs and taking training schemes is really clarified by the attitude to EPO. This is this hormone that increases the number of red cells in your body and so the amount of oxygen you can carry. When you climb a mountain, you gradually increase the number of red cells so you can cope with the altitude. And people who live at high altitudes have more red cells. And of course sportsmen know this, so that often they train at altitude to increase EPO and get more red cells, and so they can hold more oxygen, or they sleep in a tent with low oxygen for some weeks because the red cells increase rather slowly. And we accept that. That's fine. But all you've got to do is to buy some EPO and inject it. It'll do just the same. The only reason you're going up a mountain, the only reason you're living in a hyperbaric tent is to increase EPO. Well, why not buy it? It's cheaper. So the attitude to what you can do with drugs and what you can't do, by analogy with sports equipment, is a nonsense. If you take sports equipment, if you take sports training, you do far more crazy things than you ever do with taking drugs. You get a sports psychologist to bend your mind. You get a dietitian to bend your gut. All these things are acceptable, but a nice clean pill isn't. And the idea that saying the one is cheating but not the other, that just makes no sense. It's cheating in the sense that you don't tell everyone you're taking the drugs. So that means if you just allowed them to tell, they're no longer cheating. And you certainly don't tell everyone with ordinary sports training that you've got a special psychologist studying your competitors' abilities and telling you how to overcome them.
Well, we've reached a situation where to be a competitive athlete now actually requires a higher level of surveillance than if you have actually been convicted of a criminal offence. People say it's like wearing an electronic tag, but actually it's worse than wearing an electronic tag because it's not only your presence in any particular area that is policed, but it's your activities 24/7 in every aspect of your life that are policed in a way which is not expected of any citizen in any other area of life. And that is an extraordinary level of infringement on people's liberties purely because they want to participate in sport. And then, of course, how are these things policed? How accurate are the tests that are used to determine what's done? There's a lot of controversy about that. There are controversies that have arisen over everybody that's been hauled before these procedures. They are not in a position where they're able to challenge the evidence that's brought against them in a way which would satisfy any court, but these judgments can have major effects on their career. People are banned from activities, people are banned in a way which they wouldn't be for any other criminal activity, not just for a short period, but for life.
Big thing in the sports drugs is detection. You've got to be tested at random at all sorts of times, and your methods have got to be able to detect the stuff is there, isn't there, and that it's stuff that you've bought rather than your body has made. So there are whole factories, working out detection methods. They've done almost no work on what the effects of these drugs are on you. They've done an infinite amount of work on how to detect the smallest quantities. What a complete lack of proportion between the two. What you need to know is whether the drugs work and where they work and how they work. That's what we need to know. Then there'd be a story. They might come and say, yes, if you take this, it'll increase the function by whatever. Instead of which they can get down to 1 billion from some poor sod who's taken it with the pickle he took on his latest meal. This disproportion between detection and effect tells you the story. They aren't interested in effect, they've assumed effect, and they're disguising that by just going for detection.
Well, as a doctor, I've certainly seen many old footballers who are hobbling around on knees that they damaged in their youth playing football. And I've seen ballet dancers who've had many operations on their feet as a result of their very early childhood activities as ballet dancers. And indeed, every area there's a high level of injury associated with rugby, with mountain climbing, very high level of injury and mortality in those sports. It's a problem that athletes are inclined to push their performance to a level which may cause damage to their health. But that's something that athletes have themselves to take responsibility for. It's not something which the state or sporting authorities can take control over.
If you do an analysis of winning moments in sports activities, and you'll see that a cyclist can win by the tip of his nose, and you can see a high jumper by a fraction of an inch, a 100-meter sprint in a tenth of a second. In other words, all the winnings are in less than 1%, tiny bits. Now, for a drug to achieve a less than 1% effect is unknown of in pharmacology, and for two reasons. The range of drug effects is such you can never just produce that effect. So that if you've looked at all the winners, the results are always in that range. The difference can't be due to a drug. A drug won't be doing that. Secondly, you can never, ever prove such a small effect. To prove an effect, you've got to have at least of the order, 10%? You can't do it. 5%, maybe with a big enough study. You can't produce proof of effect down at that level. So that small effect, right, it's very important for a racer to get that edge on the other, but that effect can never, ever be attributed to a drug. Well, I think the case against taking drugs for sports is immoral. Because once you say there's no evidence that they work, and if some idiot tries to ban them, that's absolutely immoral. If he says you shouldn't take them because it's wrong to take them, when you know there's no evidence they work, that's immoral. It's even worse because what you're doing in taking drugs is no different from what you already allow in training. So to say they're cheating, they shouldn't be taking them, that is absolutely immoral. And the people who say that, they're the ones who really should be pointed out as having no place in the game.
There's a curious presumption that sport is a natural activity, but actually when you think about it, sport is a highly unnatural activity in the sense that it is always about human attempts to enhance nature, to advance upon what our natural capacities are by stretching our capacities, both in terms of physical exertion and the psychological drive to do better in relation to athletic performance of whatever form it is, but also in terms of using whatever techniques that we can to improve our performance. And the whole history of sport is about that endeavour. It's about using individual talent, it's about using particular techniques of training and particular sorts of equipment and particular sorts of skill in order to push the barriers of what the human is. And what we see through the history of sport is the constant advance of what human beings are capable of, both individually and collectively.
All right, so he's taken the drug. So have a dozen other of his colleagues, but you haven't found. What do? You ban him, maybe for life, just because he's taken a drug that has not been proven to have an effect. a drug who, at worst you can say, it has broken your book of rules because you've made a stupid book of rules. But what do you do then? You ban him not for the occasion, but for life. Now, this is someone who's trained for years, devoted all his time, his energy to that particular sport, given the public an immense amount of pleasure. Maybe one of very few people who can perform at that level. And you've banned them for life, for no reason whatsoever. It is absolutely criminal. One of the few ski results we got some years ago, and the poor lad had just taken a nasal sniffer and his medal was taken away. He never, ever was able to ski again. You destroy someone's life and their career. You destroy the pleasure to all of us, all because of some stupid rule for an effect that's never been proved. I think it's a disgrace, and we should stop that.